Now, as Jennifer mentioned, our goal today is to explore the data economics company, what we are building here and how. But before understanding the work of the data economics company, it's important to have a basic understanding of what data economics is and what the Lydian data economic operating system actually does. These are terms that are not necessarily very familiar in the mainstream at this point. So I'll start us off with a brief primer on both of these topics before we actually discuss the data economics company in more detail. Now, as Jen said, if you attended our virtual forum in November or have watched the videos from that event that we sent around, some of this material will sound familiar and will hopefully serve as a refresher for you. But for those who are encountering this material for the first time, just know that these concepts are not necessarily very trivial, and we will be going through a lot of them in the next 15 minutes or so. So please don't worry at all if you don't absorb all these concepts in detail at this time. We will have all this material and a lot more available on Lydian Insider for you very soon. Our goal with this primer is to arm you with some basic facts and terminology that will give you context for the rest of the session. So with that, let's talk about data economics and Lydian. So
let's yeah. I was saying, let's do some science time. So can you start? So what is data economics if you had to explain this to, just the random stranger on the street?
Right. So, I'm just going to repeat the definition I gave us in the last session, which is the most general definition, which is data economics is the science that explores the use of digital data as units of both utility and value that enable economic activity. So to put it another way, data economics is concerned with treating digital data as raw material that can be used to build or manufacture products that we call data assets. And these data assets can enable us to, one, pay for things, and two, measure the value of other things. So as a result, data economics through this model of data assets lets us sell, license, and buy the ownership of the utility or the uses of data without actually losing control or ownership of the underlying data sets.
So in talking about this, what kinds of things does it enable?
So data economics is interested in three key scenarios, and this is not that difficult to remember, and it's kind of a good, helpful primer in terms of like what is data economics. It's interested in enabling three key scenarios. Others can pay you money in exchange for specific units or specific pieces of your data, one. Two, others can provide things, goods, services, labor, in exchange for specific units of your data, which effectively means that you're paying for things with your data. And the third is it can give you the ability to have others let you use specific pieces of your data in exchange of their data, in exchange for your data. So that's a nice, helpful 1, 2, 3 to remember.
You can have transactions that involve data and money and transactions that just involve data.
Precisely, yes.
And so can you talk a bit about how this is different than the way that we've traditionally looked at using data in the business world?
Yeah, absolutely. And the current business models that have cropped up over the past 30 years or so that digital data has enabled monetization, the business models typically treat data as a featureless commodity that is bought, licensed, sold as in bulk as digital data sets. So the current models for utilizing digital data are usually limited to one, serving as data sources for digital applications, web-based apps, whatever it might be. Two, serving as a commodity that when analyzed can produce insights that can potentially lead to some increased value, increased revenue streams, whatever. And the third is by extension, it can serve then as a commodity that can be sold or licensed to others who may then want to derive insights from it, analyze the data, and so on. But data economics, on the other hand, looks at digital data as raw materials for manufacturing or minting, as we call it, products that have their own inherent utility and value. And we call these products created using digital data, data assets.
And so data asset, can you talk a little bit more about that concept?
Yeah, it's probably best to start with the idea of this thing called data economic utility. So if we think about the traditional utility of data and versus data economic utility, it can be demonstrated with an analogy. This worked really well last time and we got a lot of positive feedback, so we'll go with the same one.
Yeah, the land analogy.
Yeah, in which you imagine that the data sets are, or data streams that you have are parcels of lands or lakes or rivers or whatever that you have on your land. Now, if you were asked to utilize the land and the water bodies, you could either sell or rent the land and water bodies out, either as a whole or in parcels, or you could potentially use the land and the water and the resources they contain to build products that have their own uses or their own utilities. So you can, for example, mine or extract resources from the land and water and then sell and rent these resources out. You can use these resources to then create products by putting them through some kind of a manufacturing process. And in many cases, you can even combine these products to create new products with enhanced value. So if you think about your data sets and data streams the same way, then within what we call a data economic frame of reference, or a data economy for short, and we'll come back to this definition in a little bit, we can treat our data sets and data streams as reusable raw materials that can be used to, one, manufacture products called data assets, which can then be sold, licensed, bought, or utilized in some other way. These are called base data assets that are manufactured directly from raw data. And then these data assets can be used as inputs or raw materials for producing other types of data assets called derived data assets. And then multiple types of data assets can also be combined to form even more interesting types of higher tier data assets. So it's essentially looking at your data as raw material and figuring out ways to create products out of it that have interesting utility and hence interesting value.
All right. So going from this, can you tell us then a bit more about the building blocks of this kind of system?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the how of manufacturing data assets from digital data is pretty much what data economics is about. And it relies on two key concepts. And this is another nice one, too, to remember. The most fundamental concept in data economics is that of a data economic frame of reference, which we often shorthand as a data economy because it's much easier to say. But in terms of a data economic frame of reference, much like we need an origin and a frame of reference for any coordinate system to make sense, we need a data economic frame of reference for data assets and their related properties, features, and other concepts to exist. So data asset products only have meaning to participants within this data economic frame, outside of which the data asset is just a set of ones and zeros.
And so translating that into some of these real world examples you have up on the screen, how does the data economic frame of reference, data economy concept go with these real world ways that we can use data?
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, the concept of a data economic frame might sound alien, but we actually operate within data economies a fair bit already in our day-to-day lives and are able to pay for things with digital data assets. So for example, think about a loyalty card at a coffee shop that you might have as a digital asset stored on your phone, stored by a service. Credit card miles that you earn and then are able to utilize to gain access to flights, hotels, etc. Even currency itself is just a piece of data that usually denotes a unit of credit between the holder and the issuing governance body. And even cryptocurrencies, utility tokens, they are all just pieces of data that are just different types of quote unquote data assets that circulate within different economic frames, data economic frames of reference. And we have some examples up on the screen.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So going from here into the methodology that we've developed, the Lydian data economic operating system, can you break this down into some of the components and get a bit more into the how around data assets and the like?
Yeah, absolutely. So just for a reminder, the first key concept I said was a data economic frame of reference, which is you have to define certain parameters within which your data assets exist, within which they make sense. The second key concept associated with it is that in order to be a usable product or data asset or a package of data, needs to have a set of features that is common to most utilizable products. Most products that can be used, digital or otherwise, you will find have certain features. First is identity, which is how can the asset be identified within the data economy, within the frame of reference, and then be distinguished from its copies. The second is context or meaning, which is what does the package of data mean to others. utility, which is exactly how the asset can be utilized or used, by when, by whom, under what conditions. And the fourth is value, which is based on utility. They are the same thing from an economic perspective. A value is basically just methods to evaluate the data asset and express its value as money or as other data assets. So, to answer your question about how do you actually create these assets out of digital data, the process of turning a digital data quantum or a piece of digital data into a utilizable data asset is what's called assetization. And you mentioned the Lydian data assetization methodology, and we'll come to that in a second. But any method that can take a piece of data and turn it into a data asset or a product is a process of assetization and needs an assetization methodology. Now, there are many assetization methodologies to build useful products out of digital data. The system that the manufacturer of a data asset uses to transform just raw digital data into a product, into a data asset, is what we call a data economic operating system, or a DEOS. And you'll hear this term a lot. Now, what the DEOS does is takes care of those two concepts that we talked about. One is that it defines and identifies the data economic frame of reference. And there are different ways of doing that. The assetization methodology determines that. And the second, the thing that the assetization methodology determines through the data economic operating system, is how to inject these properties of identity, meaning, utility, and value into a package of digital data, such that it can then be used to pay for things or utilized within the frame of reference. Now, again, if we just look at these familiar data economies and data assets that we saw, the coffee shop, the credit card miles, the cryptocurrencies, money, we will see that we can quite easily actually identify what their data economic operating systems are and exactly how they are injecting these rules of identity, meaning, utility, value into the pieces of data.
No, thanks. And I appreciate you explaining that so clearly, especially on behalf of our audience, because these are pretty complex concepts. So moving on now from the real world examples a bit, can we talk more about how this actually works from a science perspective in the Lydian framework?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we talked about data economic operating system, and we see that pretty much everything a lot of the stuff that we've seen in our daily lives, including things like the Bitcoin network, Ethereum network, the system that allows your credit card miles, these can also all be considered data economic operating systems because they let you pay with some kind of digital data and lets you unlock some kind of value using digital data. Now, Lydian is what we call a specific assetization methodology. Now, we see that all of these data economies that exist in the real world, within which we can pay for things with data, but none of the data that's being used to create these digital assets actually belongs to us as people, as companies, even when we generate it. That's where the Lydian data economic methodology and the Lydian data economic operating system come in. The primary goal of the Lydian DEOS is to allow the design and implementation of data assets and the data economic frames that they live within using any combination of data sets and data streams owned by the participants in the data economy. That is, Lydian data assets are created using data sets that we as people, as companies, are generating and that we own. So if we examine the context of all of the real world data assets that we have discussed so far, we see that there is a pattern. The data asset itself is always the outcome or the result of work requiring a provable, non-trivial amount of energy being spent in the real world. So put another way, each data asset contains within it proof of work done in the real world as its context or as its reason or meaning for existing. This leads us to the key insight that is at the heart of the Lydian data economic methodology, the method that the Lydian DEOS uses to turn any data set, any data stream into data assets, which is the very existence of a Lydian data asset is the result of, is dependent on work completed, work performed in the real world. If such work had not been performed, the asset simply wouldn't exist. So the Lydian DEOS generalizes this concept into a framework in which digital data sets and data streams get packaged up into these logical blocks that represent measurement of outcomes created by some kind of work done in the real world, some kind of energy spent in the real world that was measured. So as a result, a Lydian data asset can represent a proxy for these real world outcomes, these real world tasks that led to the creation of this data asset, including the expenditure of the energy required to complete these tasks, and hence the scarcity of the outcomes that these tasks generated. So now the utility and the value of such a data asset can be based on the completed tasks, the outcomes that are contained within the data asset. And that represents its meaning and its reason for existence.
Now, this all sounds good, and of course, we've developed this all together. So it's fun to listen to, though, explaining it to an audience. And so I think the next piece that we get into is how the data assets are actually formed from all of these outcomes of the completed tasks.
Yeah, absolutely. So a Lydian data asset specifically, it's a very, very specific structure that's created by the Lydian Data Economic Operating System, or DEOS. It's a package of data, or data quantum, as we call it, that comprises two types of data. One is context, which has the data that represents the outcomes of the various tasks completed that were required to generate the asset, as well as the various tasks that track the utilization of the asset once it has been generated. And the second type of data contained in the asset are the rules that are expressed as these modular digital programs that specify the rules for generating, utilizing, evaluating this specific type of data asset. And these programs together are called a data asset factory. So the context data and the rules together enable the data asset to tell three very important stories about itself. So any data asset formed from any kind of data can tell you these three stories and answer these four questions, which is a story of generation and scarcity, which answers the question, who are you and why were you made? A story of utility, which answers the question, what have you been used for in the past? And a story of value, or future utility, which answers the question, what can you be used for in the future? And this brings us to the final couple of concepts that are interesting. That if you have a basic understanding of what a data asset is, it's a product built out of digital data that has some use, that has some value. Now, the next concept that's interesting is that, okay, there are people and organizations who are involved in generating or utilizing a specific type of data asset. And these are essentially participants in a market that exist within their data economic frame. And this is called a data asset market. So a Lydian data asset market very specifically comprises participants who are the entities, the people, organizations responsible for generating and utilizing data assets from the market, and a subset of those who determine the rules governing the market. The data asset factory that we mentioned, which is a set of digital programs that encode and enforce the rules of the data asset market. The data asset vault, where all of the data assets of a certain type or class that are controlled and generated by this market are stored, which typically is a database. And the data sources, the data sets, data streams, and other data asset markets that are used to mint the various data asset types managed by this data asset market. And each participant of the market usually maintains their own copy of the data asset factory, their own copy of the vault, and they are connected to each other over a closed private network that's called a data economic network. Should we talk really quickly about data economic networks, Jennifer, unless you had another question?
A quick primer on that.
Right, and this is really the last concept because it brings everything together. So raw data builds data assets. Data assets get built and traded by data asset markets. And data asset markets connect with each other over data economic networks, or DNets. And the various data asset markets within a specific data economy, they work together to enable specific sets of solutions for its participants. So a Lydian data economy is basically nothing other than a set of these data asset markets that each manage a specific type of data asset that are working together towards some end, and the various participants who are part of that data economy or that data economic frame. So here, for example, you can see like a set of data asset markets that are working together to enable an organic self-certification process for cotton and other crops for goods manufacturers through data assets. And at the same time, helping give credit back to the farms and the farmers who are generating and contributing the data that is enabling and powering the certification process. And this is actually one of the solutions we're developing right now, as we will learn. So the Lydian DEOS, what it does is it implements data economies through these data economic networks or DNets that basically comprise a set of applications called data economic apps or DApps that run on these computers called nodes, which are basically just computers running the DApp that connect with each other to form a data economic network. So the data economic network can be thought of as a real world representation of a data economy or a data economic frame of reference. And the Lydian DEOS is a basically piece of technology that provides the libraries, tools, and related API to implement these data economic solutions and specific implementations of data economic solutions as one or more data economic networks. So an implementation of a data economic solution is just a specific data economic network that is created among a set of participants. And a solution can have many implementations among different sets of participants. And each of these implementations creates a new data economy among participants. And obviously, these data economies can also connect with each other if they need to. And that's pretty much it. Those are the basic concepts that the Lydian methodology and the Lydian DEOS uses to create data economies for any combination of participants using any combination of data sets and data streams. And we've gone through a lot of use cases and a lot of different solutions, and it's just become more and more robust. So we are really happy and proud of what we have built there. One final concept is that the Lydian DEOS can be used to create two different but related types of data economic applications. One is what we call solution platforms. These are larger scale applications that implement a common set of features or functionality that is required by a specific group of solutions in a specific industry. And then the second is standalone data economic applications that is just for a specific set of participants implementing a very specific need. So that's pretty much all we need to know to start understanding why data economics can be interesting and impactful across all industries and sectors. So we'll wrap up this science and technology portion of today's event and start at looking at the opportunities that the science of data economics and the Lydian DEOS have opened up for us.